evening, everyone. My name is Jose Rincon. I'm the Artistic Services Manager here at Opera America, and welcome to the final Making Connections session of the 2010-2011 season. Tonight's session is being streamed live on the homepage of the Opera America website, so welcome to those of you. Tweet that. Welcome to those of you who are joining us online. Thank you to all of you who have been with us here throughout this past season. We'll soon be sending out a survey to get your feedback on future speakers and sessions you might like to see, and just how we can improve the program in general. One major way we plan on enhancing the Making Connections program and all Opera America programming is by creating the first ever National Opera Center, which will take up the 7th and 8th floor of this building, and will feature a recital hall, practice rooms, a recording studio, library, in addition to the Opera America offices. So it's very exciting. We plan to open the center in the fall of 2012, and we look forward to keeping you apprised of our progress. Before we get started, if you could take a moment to silence your cell phones, if you haven't already done so. Tonight's discussion will go till about 8 p.m. Afterwards, we hope you'll stay for a glass of wine and some continued conversation. So without further delay, I will turn it over to Marc.
Hi there. Nice to see you. Welcome. Good to see some Making Connections veterans and some people I haven't had the pleasure of meeting before. So let's get to say hello after the interview. But the real applause goes to Lauren Flanigan, the thinking man's diva.
Thank you.
As noted in Time magazine, Lauren, who has delivered riveting, compelling performances for as long as I've known her, which is 30 years.
Exactly.
I was so fortunate in that early in my career at Chicago Opera Theater, we hired Lauren, and it was on one of your very first engagements to do Curly's Wife in of Mice and Men.
Technically, you've actually known me more than half my life.
Yes, and
yep.
I wish I could say the same. And and from that 1986 performance, I've just been such a fan of Lauren's for delivering just riveting theatrical performances that happen also to be sung. And it's just such a pleasure to have you here after all, Scala and Met and City Opera and so many other important performances. So thank you for coming today.
Thank you.
We want to chat about professional development and singers and what they need to really move ahead, and we have a number of questions that have been prepared. The first one deals with the issue of self-assessment. The question of how a singer can either reflect on their own abilities and gifts and what they have to offer, or their limitations, and how a singer develops a network of trusted people who give the kind of feedback they need either to choose another career or to be the best possible artist they can be.
Well, that question sort of threw me because I feel like there's a kind of and probably for the better, a corporate sense now of how one goes about developing their career. And that didn't exist, like, as you well know, in like the 80s when I got out of college. So that group of trusted people was really just like 3 people. It was your voice teacher and like 1 or 2 coaches. But things are different now, and so you were in the old days. That was slightly bizarre that I actually uttered that. You were mostly juggling with your desire against your teacher's idea of where you were going to go musically. And so it wasn't that complicated. You weren't in a big conversation. It was a small, intimate thing that you were doing with 1 or 2 other people. But you could do things like a big tour or something, and the more you did those kinds of things, the more valued it was that you had done 55 performances of Susanna and Nozze di Figaro, or Sophie and Rosenkavalier, or something like that. Rosalinda, and no matter what's the company, that was valued. Your experience was valued. Now there seems to be a kind of a hierarchy, and so this sort of a way of looking at yourself in a corporate structure, I feel like is kind of the way singers are taught or educated. We did a singer thing in Pittsburgh a couple of months ago, right? Okay. And I sat there completely awestruck at everyone's ability to talk about, like, getting together a group of trusted advisors and putting together a plan for yourself and talking about how realistic that plan is and all of that. And I really sat there completely confounded thinking, wow, is that really necessary? And then actually I'm a complete convert. I've gone over to the other side now because I've had that material for 2 months now? 3 months? And I look at it and I think it's a really interesting, thoughtful way of going about setting a career up for yourself or setting up a life in music. I think where singers get off track now is if you decide you want to be an opera star, you can't be, because we don't determine that.
Who does?
I don't know. Maybe Jesus.
When you say hierarchy, do you mean training programs?
Yeah.
And
There is a structure now that they would prefer you follow. There are freakish examples of people who get ahead without having done that. But that's sort of the exception and not the rule
Would
now.
you have been a good young artist program enrollee?
Yeah, because I loved smart stuff. And I loved opportunity. And I wanted to be on stage more than I wanted to be off stage.
But your voice, the size of your voice, the dynamism of your sound, would you have been able to do, chorus work at those apprentice programs?
Yeah, I mean, I would have. I think that the interesting thing about, like, when I was coming up, I come in right at the tail end of, you could be any shape, any size, any whatever, as long as your voice fit the repertoire. I come in at the tail end of that and the very beginning of, you have to look your part. Now we're only in that. You have to look your part. And so, to that degree, I'm not sure if I would have gotten into one, I would have made it work. I don't know if I would have gotten into one because the parts I wanted to do, like Zofie and Rosenkavalier and Marie and the Daughter of the Regiment, Norina, Don Pasquale, I would never have been cast to understudy. So I probably would not have gotten into that kind of a thing. But there is a prescribed way now that people encourage you to follow. That's good. My feeling is that we're like a little too hung up on the website and the physical presentation, and we're not singing enough. So the part of the workshops I've done with you that I've taken away, that I feel like apply to me, is I just always sang. If I wasn't singing, something was wrong.
And you don't mean that you always sang at an opera company?
No.
That you had a full vocal life,
Right.
not necessarily on an opera company stage.
Right. I had a great friend, Jim Hay. He's a tenor. We put together a whole thing of Shakespeare songs. And we did duets from operas with Shakespearean themes. We did...
Where did you do those duets?
At Christ and St. Stephen's Church. We did it at Jan Hus Church. We did it at West Park Presbyterian Church. We did it at some clubs. I became very involved in the performance arts scene in the East Village in the 80s, and so if you were Yoshiko Chuma and you wanted an aria in your School of Hard Knocks, I was your girl. If you were Anne Bogart and you needed people who were helping you put together a body of work from disparate, disciplines, and the pay was subway tokens, I was your girl. I just did it. I got paid subway tokens half the time. I met the most incredible group of actors, writers, sculptors, painters, choreographers, John Kelly. I mean, people who've remained my close friends who've inspired me. And that gets me back to your thing, which is I'm okay with the corporate thing. I actually embrace that. But I was talking to one of the students who live in my house the other day about, like, I wanted to impress smart people. I wanted your respect. I wanted people like Ann Bogart to want to work with me. So I did the work it took to get them to be interested in me, which meant you have to keep inside the creative process.
And for you, the creative process is performing. It's not staying home and learning every note of Traviata for the day you do.
I learned every note of Traviata and Don Giovanni and Don Pasquale, and I did all that. But no, it's actually, you get better as you perform. You get more open to people's processes as you perform with them. You get more creative the more you are around creative people. You just do. You know, maybe the only people who can work in a vacuum are poets and sculptors or painters. I don't know. But the rest of us actually have to work as a collaborator. We need to hear what other people are doing. We need to get inspiration.
Would you wait for an invitation from the Presbyterian Church to come do your duet program?
I never wait for an invitation.
What do you do?
I mean, part of being a New Yorker, I think, is sort of knowing the places where people perform in an affordable way so that you can stay in touch with your profession without plunking down. I mean, like, in the 80s, there was no student rush to the Met, just FYI, or City Opera. You actually had to stand, and the line was like 400 times longer than it is now. There was no process, you know, it was like everybody gathering out there on Saturday morning, you know, like all that, and or at 5 o'clock, you know, and
For standing room.
For standing room, and so, no, you know, you
didn't wait for an invitation.
So you knew the places where, let's say, Christopher Alden was directing an Offenbach opera, and Angelina Rayo was the star, and you knew that Leonard Bernstein really was interested in Angelina Rayo, and you knew that she had recorded La Boheme. You knew, for instance, that Sherry Greenewald had made quite a name for herself doing performances in offbeat venues in New York. Pretty much in the 80s in New York, if you weren't in a legitimate theater or at Lincoln Center, everything else was considered an offbeat venue. And they were all kind of on an equal playing field, like the Garage and Off-Broadway had relatively the same kind of weight. You know, one wasn't valued over the other.
Do you think the same opportunities exist today? That if you were 25 years old today, that you could construct the same kind of rich artistic life in New York that you constructed then?
It's just different. You just have to go about, you know, times change and you go about gathering information differently. It actually might be easier because of all this, you know, because of the internet and everything. It actually might be slightly easier. I mean, in my mind, you know, churches are always willing to do something. And they're always willing to make a deal with you. You know, charge $20, you keep 10, they keep 10. But you type up your own programs. Or you give them 15, you keep 5, but they type up the programs. You know, I mean, I don't know. I mean, like we were talking past weekend. I'm going to try to do some concerts in community gardens in Harlem this summer. They're there. We have an electric piano at our disposal, and so why not? I have a lot of friends who aren't working this summer, so let's just, you know, create some excitement in a different way. It's just hard because I think schools concentrate so much on an audition class and a repertoire class and all of this stuff to understand that actually you just get better by doing. You know, it's a constant topic of conversation with me. And
as you reflect on your own skill in doing this, are there innate qualities that you have, innate abilities that you have that enabled you to put together such a rich portfolio of performance experience on your own?
You know, I don't know. I mean, BU, Boston University...
Inhibition isn't one of your qualities.
No, that's true. I'm not very inhibited. You know, at Boston University, by the time I graduated, I had a repertoire of probably close to 200, 250 songs in my back pocket that I could do at any time. I mean, and everyone else was similarly educated. And so it wasn't difficult to do a whole Songs of Mallarmé concert because if you knew 8, someone else knew 10. If you knew half of Winterreise, somebody else knew the other half. If you knew Das Marienleben, which I did, somebody else knew another Hindemith piece or a Hermann Reuter piece that you could add to it that made it, it wasn't, we knew so much.
So, and you knew so much literature that you could be really clever then in thinking about what kind of program could you cobble together with
Right.
another friend who knows literature. So
Right.
knowing the repertoire operatically, the song repertoire, and thinking creatively about what you can do with it.
Right. I mean, you know, there are a couple of things that always land. Love songs always land. Shakespeare's always, people always want a Shakespeare program. They always want something about love. You know, if you're doing a duet concert with a guy, then to do the whole, like, you know, man-woman thing, you know, that's always an easy sell. You know, impressionist landscapes of the 1930s, that might be harder to sell to, like, a church. Although I did it. So I did a thing at Juilliard called Jazz dans la nuit, and it was all classical compositions from the 1920s and 30s that were basically constructed around this idea of the diminished seventh, which is like an inherently jazzy chord. And Roussel wrote a great piece called Jazz dans la nuit, which is all built around that. And so I constructed this whole thing, and I put checker tablecloths on the tables and candles, and it was crazy. It was so much fun, though.
As you are advising young singers today, what are the biggest inhibitions you experience over which you have to push those young singers to get them to think more creatively about their performance life?
I think that I don't know, it's they don't perform enough. It's like everybody, it's funny because we hit on this past weekend, you and I, when we were at the Museum of the Moving
really
Image.
supportive, we've heard too.
Do we look different? In that, you know, it's really hard because, and it's a hard concept to grasp a hold of. So don't kick yourself if you get caught up in this. And this is a conversation in our house. Okay, so you're educated to discover opportunities and to take advantage of opportunities as they come up, right? So you have to audition for those things. And then as you kind of increase in the hierarchy of that, your life really revolves around opportunities that are created for you, that your agents find for you, that opera companies make for you. And the death of your creative life is that you cease to create your own opportunities and you just wait for other people's opportunities. I think that now more than ever, because of this sort of corporate structure, that should almost be a class, you know, like how do you do your own thing while you're waiting for the other, like while you're working on the other thing. I really do now.
And in our singer training forum, you know, one of my learning tidbits from that is the notion that, in a way, the young artist training programs replicate the university experience, where again you are being given a schedule, you are being regimented, and you're not inventing it, you're following someone else's direction.
Yeah.
And that the longer one goes in one's early career, being told by others when to show up, what to rehearse, they don't invent for themselves what they might do.
And it's hard, and I admit it's super hard because so much of the information out there is about getting into something, applying for something. You know, it's not about creating your own opportunity for something. And so it's tough. I mean, Bob Sirota, who's the president of Manhattan School of Music, was my music theory teacher at Boston University. And we just go back and forth about this all the time. And I think finally this year he agreed with me that there are a lot of people, and I think it wasn't even based on me. I think it was because Yo-Yo Ma said something at a master class where he said that everybody like he has students who have better websites than he does, but don't have time to like do the work he's given them, and mostly because they're concentrating on getting themselves out in that way and not getting themselves out in this way. And I think, you know, that's why, you know, as we were talking, I think this idea of finding students and really concentrating on them one-on-one and just like trying to persuade them that there is there are other things is kind of the way forward.
You had a wonderful image on, you created a wonderful image on Saturday, and you said that when you were young, you saw the world like this, and
Great
your teachers
teacher.
focused you.
Yeah.
But today you find that most young singers are like this, and your job as a teacher is to awaken them.
Because it's funny, it's like you can talk to people in China, but you don't know anything about China. And when I was in high school, China was this like crazy place full of like, you know, bad rulers but exotic, beautiful material. Like it was this incredibly vast thing, and you were fascinated by it, and by Africa and by India. And now I find that people talk to and are engaged in something without this scope of like really globally, like who they're engaged in a conversation with.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, in many ways, my only criticism of opera today is I feel like it's not connected anymore. It's very single focus driven about appealing to something instead of, it kind of threw down before. And it was a little amorphous, it was a little wild, you know, it didn't always look right, but it most often sounded like something you never thought you'd ever hear ever again, and you had to go back because you were afraid it was never going to happen ever again, and that desire to recreate that thing was constantly there. And now it looks really great, but sometimes that crazy thing, that you know, that weird thing when you put crazy artists together who may not all like each other, and a conductor who pretty much
Doesn't like any of them.
exactly like weird, that created some interesting tensions that have been written about in 20 books. And it's, you know, and historically it has real credo, you know. I mean, it's so fascinating that when Michael Tippett wrote Midsummer Marriage, Joan Sutherland did the world premiere, and everybody rather disliked her singing modern music, but they loved this weird thing that happened in the course of this piece. And years later, when she was speaking about it, she kept saying that, you know, this crazy opera about existential, therapy. You know, and he was, you know, stoned the whole time he wrote it, you know, and it's an opera about existential therapy. It's like so crazy. And she writes about it later, and she says, you know, I didn't understand the thing I was being asked to do. And I loved that because I'm sure that's what created this weird tension that audiences couldn't get enough of.
There are a couple of things I want to ask you. When you did our first salon evening a couple of years ago, we had done some other programs in the office, and we turned on the lights, we turned off the lights, but in that office we had some little halogen spots on some posters, and you came into the office, you turned them, you took our tables and found tablecloths and made a prop. And your lesson to everyone, and I haven't forgotten it, is that every room is a performance space.
Oh, totally, completely.
And do you just walk around looking at that? Your antenna is always up.
Always
looking for space that could be a performance
always
space.
Yeah, there's like 10 people in here who totally know that's completely true about me. Yeah.
The other thing that I observed when you did the Antony Cleopatra for City Opera at Carnegie Hall, it was a concert performance, and I was aware of how you didn't have props. It was a concert performance, but for you, your glasses were a prop. The way you took them on or put them off. Your score was a prop. The music stand was a prop. The shawl that you wore, of course, smartly, was a prop. How did you develop the dramatic side of your great performance ability?
Well, you know, I wanted to be an actress, so, you know, and the critics of my singing, that's, you know, pretty much, I don't argue with them, because I think that's where that comes from, is that for better or worse, a lot of my focus has, just since birth, has been on acting. And I like the intellectual challenge of it. I do. And I pursued that since I was 12 years old. I sang, but I didn't pursue singing in that way. it wasn't until I met Judith Raskin. I mean, I loved singing at Boston University, but the whole opera thing was a little too crazy for me. And so it was Judith Raskin who really helped me make sense of who I was and how that could fit into the opera world. And I mean, you know, it's when I was, you know, I'm sure people are tired of hearing it, but I was born in the Haight-Ashbury in 1958. You know, I wasn't exactly, you know, raised to do this very square thing. I really wasn't. And I went to ACT, the American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco. At BU, I took this wonderful class every semester called Acting for the Non-Major. It was a terrific teacher.
So you took acting classes?
I just did. Maxine Willie Klein, she was an amazing acting teacher who taught guerrilla theater, how you make theater on the street and how you make it out of Pablo Neruda poems, how you make it out of Garcia Lorca poems, or, I mean, we made theater happen like on Commonwealth Avenue and downtown. And when I came to New York, I immediately took a Sanford Meisner workshop and got to work in Meisner's class. And then in this crazy, weird world of circumstances, Manhattan School of Music got a phone call from Music Theater Group, Diane Wangersford, saying, we're looking for an opera singer who might be open to the idea of changing the context of Massenet's Cinderella, Cendrillon. And, I mean, I wasn't by any stretch of the imagination like their star. I really wasn't. But they thought of me for that. Mm-hmm. And I went down and did this audition, and there was this long table of people, and I remember this woman sitting at the very end, you know, and she was all weird looking and crazy hair and everything, and I started singing you know, Layla's aria from the Pearl Fishers, Comme autrefois. And I'm like singing it, because this is where the crook of the piano is, so I'm singing it here, and my body's turning, and it's turning, and it's turning. By the end, I'm like singing right to this woman, and that was Anne Bogart. And they asked me to do all these like different exercises, and do the aria again, and do it a couple of times in different ways. And I walked out of there thinking, wow, I don't know if I'm ever going to work with them, but I got to figure out, like, if they don't want me, I got to figure out, like, how I can hang out with them. Mm-hmm. And by the time I got home, they had already left a message saying, if you want to do this, we would really like to work with you.
And were there stage directors who didn't just tell you where to move, but who gave you the building blocks to figure out your own dramatic interpretations?
Oh, Christopher Alden. I mean, you know, it's so interesting because, you see, there's only, like, 3 kinds of directors, really. I mean, and there might just be 2. There are directors who come in with a very well-formed idea of what they want to do, how it's going to look, and where you go. That is very, very old-fashioned and very, very modern. Like, it goes very old-fashioned to, like, Giancarlo Delmonico and all of those people, but then it becomes very modern, like Robert Wilson, where he already knows, like, where this hand is going to go, and that over the course of an hour, it's going to take from there to there, like Civil Wars, if anybody saw Civil Wars. And so that's one way. That had been the predominant way. As you know, opera had been put on the stage for a very, very long time, and then in the 80s, something starts to happen. Christopher Alden, Stephen Wadsworth, Nick Muny, Anne Bogart, Francesca Zambello, you know, I could keep going. These are people who come in and just say, okay, do something. So you're singing Nos Piratas en so you have to know, like, I'm calling over there because that guy's here, and I don't know where Don Ottavio is, and my father's going to come in, and blah, blah, blah. So that's the beginning, by the way, of Don Giovanni. And so what was happening a lot was that other singers would say, why don't I get directing credit? I thought of it all. But not so much, really. I mean, basically then, like a Nick Muny, for instance, because I worked with him a lot and I love him dearly, is that he looks at all of the ideas that are thrown out there, and he starts to pick the ones where he is feeling like you are telling the most direct story and this person is responding to that. So in fact, it's very much more complicated. It's much, much more complicated. You know, Luke Bondi, that's what he's like. That's why, in a way, some of the criticism of, like, Tosca, for instance, lands because maybe no one else can be that Tosca. Maybe it's so specific to Caritamacula that nobody's going to, an opera that doesn't come from that tradition. It comes from the tradition of this staging has to work for 10 Toscas. They have to be able to find their own voice in the context of this production. So,
getting back to the coaching, the mentoring of young artists, what do you do to open up a young artist's narrow view of singing, of opera, of the world, and awaken them to the surprise of the unexpected?
I don't know, ask them. They're right there. There's 3 of them right in the front row there. Like, browbeat the crap out of them. Listen, this is something I'm super interested in. I think you live by example. You know, I started this mentoring thing. The balance was off, though, of performing and conversation. You know, it's like your parents. You know, they browbeat you with the lesson, but it's not until you actually see them in that circumstance and how they maneuver themselves through it that you kind of get it. And so I think that you are your story, and you just keep telling it. You live it, and you keep telling it. You have to want to be an artist. This comes up a lot. This came up, we've been arguing with this. If you want a job, get a job. If you want to be in opera, become an artist and make people want to work with you. And that's just all there is to it. Just become an artist.
What does that mean?
It just means keep in the process of being inquisitive and creative. Just keep in that process. Keep in the process of asking people questions. If you meet somebody and you're working with them, ask them about the piece. Stay in that process of gathering information and making it special. Because you just never know when it's going to land, when you're going to need to use it. And just keep in the process of creating. Nobody wants to work with someone who just wants a job. They just don't. And we heard Keith Wood said that over and over again at those conferences. I can't remember who else. Jonathan, Dallas Opera.
Jonathan Pell.
Thank you. It's Jonathan Pell. I mean, nobody wants that person. What they want is, and this is so interesting, it's not like you go in for La Boheme and you look like Mimi. It's that you look like Mimi, but something about what you did surprised them in a way they had never expected. And so they suddenly go, wow, I heard Don Delieta 4,000 times. Mm-hmm. But when you did that whole thing about, this one day I was coaching it with someone, and they say the thing about, it's yours, the prayer book, the this and the that, and I say, well, you say them all in one phrase, like they're special. They're things he gave you, at special times. When were those times? You get a big question mark. But once we worked through this, that person sang it at an audition, and like the person who was listening to her said, oh my God, no one's ever done that. Where like those things were like almost in parentheses, where you saw a story behind Il Libro di Preghiere and all that. Just you know what I mean? And so it's that thing. It's that investigation of that piece, and then coming in there and just saying, this is what it is. Because if you're standing up there going, I want a job as Mimi, that's what comes out. Mimi has a job.
You shop for shoes, you shop for earrings. Do you shop for a mentor?
Yeah, pretty much, I think. People that are overtly critical need to go. They just need to go. You need people that are more balanced on the side of positive input. Whether you can hear it or not, I don't, that's for your shrink. You know what I mean? And how you internalize that, that's for your shrink. But you need people around you who say yes more than they say no. Because unfortunately, once you get into an opera, they say no more than they say yes. From 10 to 6, you're pretty much told every choice you make, everything you do is wrong. Every vowel is wrong. There's like, you know what I mean? It's like you just get into that professional environment where no is the word of the day. And it's true. And you have to circumnavigate all of that. You've got to take in all of that and throw out what you can throw out. So yeah, you got to shop for a voice teacher. You got to find the people who are going to keep you on track. that people have nothing invested in it other than your personal success. And, you know, I don't know if that's so hard these days, actually. Because I think, you know, like, a bunch of us are acutely aware of how much harder it is now, like me, Debbie Boyd, Dawn Upshaw, certainly. So I think that where, like, the old dames, like, didn't make themselves available to us at all, you know, unless you were somehow anointed, you know, great. They kept that distance, you know, and which is in and of itself pretty wonderful, too. I think that people like Rosalind Elias, you know, like Tom Hampson, you know, they're making themselves much more available to keep you moving in a certain direction.
I know you put a premium on reading books and just, you know, knowing what you're doing, knowing the history of, the times of, the characters that you're working with. Do you listen to recordings?
Oh God, yeah. I haven't lately. I mean, I really since.
Should a singer listen to recordings?
Oh yeah, my God. We're so much further away from the source now, you know, it's like, oh yeah. The thing that's difficult about the recording thing...
Old recordings are what you can hear on YouTube. Okay. Old recordings. Anything before 1970 is just totally worthwhile. Even before 1975. I mean, just so worthwhile. But it's that old black and white film thing, you know, it's like my brother, who's only a year older than me, he doesn't like black and white films, he likes color. So, whatever, you just do it. Because you can draw this line from the composer to that person. So it's good. You got to hear, see, the way we hear Traviata now and the way that Verdi imagined it is not the same. So you have to hear, is it Toscanini conduct Licia Albanese? You got to hear it. It's light, it's fun, it's easy, it's not big and thick and lyric. Whether you like it or not, I don't care. You just got to listen to it because because from Verdi to them was a really short leap, really short, and so it's very valuable to understand that. You know. So I'm a big fan of all of that. Plus, those singers were, you know, you couldn't get on the stage unless you learned how to sing through your passaggio, unless you had a trill, unless you know, could do messa di voce. I mean, you couldn't get on the stage. No one would let you. So you need to hear what that was like, because that's not so true. YouTube. I like YouTube. The problem is when you click something that there's that crazy right-hand bar that starts to throw up every crazy thing, and so it's so easy to get distracted from your original intention. And then, unfortunately, a lot of the really great stuff that's on YouTube is just got pictures. It has no video. So it becomes really, I'll just, you know, if I was 20, I probably wouldn't be that interested. It becomes really hard, unless you're researching something to really keep paying attention to it. I'm a fan of YouTube, you know, I mean, there's so much good stuff. VAI, don't they have their own channel now? Like VAI, so do VAI's channel, because first of all, those guys are terrific. Secondly, everything they have is just really good in some weird way, and they want that stuff to be available to you for free. They want that stuff to be available to you to use. You know, they have very good intentions. Of course, if you're listening to old recordings, you're listening to old music, but you've also done a lot of new work. And how do you balance new work with the classics? How do they inform one another?
Well, it's funny because all music was once new music, but it was driven by a certain technique, and all the composers were well schooled in that technique. And one of the things we just discovered in this round of Vox presentations at City Opera last weekend, or 2 weekends ago, is that while composers are given amazing classes in writing for harp, they're never taught the difference between a lyric and a dramatic coloratura, and how to write for voice, how to write for type. We're still considered voice types, so it's super important. So, my thing is that because there was a technique that informed that writing, we've largely gotten away from that. So what you do is you take the technique that you're going to use for the predominant part of your career, which is classical music, Mozart, Donizetti, Verdi, Rossini, Puccini, all right, Bizet, and you use that to inform this. In the 70s, they moved away from that toward a new vocalism, where composers were asking singers to take the vibrato out of their sound, to make crazy sounds, to do odd things. And while interesting, and I certainly find it fascinating, audiences weren't that compelled to it, especially the vocal music. When I got asked to do that music by Michael Tisson Thomas, I said, I can only do it if I can use my normal singing voice. To which he said, great, let's see what that's like. And he was friendly with Kathy Berberian and worked with her, and so a piece that I was doing had been a piece that was pretty much owned by her for many, many years, Epiphanies by Luciano Berio. And he liked that. I took this very coloratura idea, this Rossini coloratura idea, and sort of did my own version of her Sprechstimme with it, but kept it in that, bel canto way, so that I could then go on and sing something else after that. So I think that what you have to do is take this technique that you're being taught, this either Italianate or German, there's only really two different techniques, and move that into the use of modern music. And then if composers ask you for different things, like composers here, so I have to be careful, then if composers ask you to stylistically start to change things, then you enter into a dialogue with them and say, okay, so I can do that. Like, I can do things with my voice, but I have to do it way above the staff. I can't do it in the staff. Like, that starts to really monkey with my technique. So then you get into a discussion about that.
Now that's about bringing the classical into the contemporary.
Yeah, you always
How about
have
bringing the contemporary into the classical? Does doing new work give you insight into how to do standard repertoire?
I don't know if it does musically, but theatrically, yes, because new work is pretty much about American realism. Like this very realistic form of acting. This very, group theater, or, it's the constraints of modern composition. They really want acting like you would see on Broadway. So you have to avail yourself to a character and to do that work. And then suddenly, when you go back to do Me, Me, what happens is you realize it's not enough. That what you did before was tip of the iceberg, and it's a gigantic iceberg. And there's a lot more to see and a lot more to do to inform Me, Me. And so in that way, it's fascinating, and I've had singers come to me like over and over and over again and say, oh my God, when I did, Emily in Our Town, I had no idea. And then when I did all the character work and worked with the director, and then I got hired to do Musetta and La Boheme, and I thought, what was I thinking the first 3 times I did it? And I said, yeah, it's all a learning process. Yeah.
Have you ever thought about stage directing?
I don't think about it, but I've been asked. People always say that to me. I'm not so sure that ability to be a really good interpretive artist means that you could actually be that kind of a creative artist. And I know there's people are giving me bad vibes from this side of the room right now, but because they think I'm a creative artist, and I don't think of myself in that way. I think that what I'm really good at is taking the ideas of the director, the designers, and myself, and finding a way to fuse all that together. I think that's my strength. When critics accuse me of doing something as though I merely just went out on stage and acted, it's such a weird thing for me, because I've never done anything on stage where it wasn't completely in consensus with the whole team, including the conductor. I've never done something where the conductor was totally opposed to any of the choices that were being made. It just doesn't happen, and yet often it's reviewed in a vacuum. So I don't know. I do a tiny bit of directing in actor workshops where I use Anne Bogart's Viewpoints training to get the kids to direct themselves in using a series of shared.
To direct themselves or
Yes.
to direct one another?
No, to direct themselves, and using a shared vocabulary. It's like, how many viewpoints are there, people out there? There are 9.
9.
And that was good though. There are 9 viewpoints, and so to get them to, through it, like use of this shared vocabulary, we get them to work together to create structure using spatial relationship, kinesthetic response, architecture, topography, floor pattern. It's a very dynamic way of creating work together. And then once you've got it in your body, it's a really interesting way of then using it to create character. So that if you're doing a Marshallin, and if you're Sophie and your Marshallin, or better, if you're Octavian and your Marshallin is large and imposing, that's one way. But if you do another production where you're like eye to eye, that's a different, you can't do that. You can't do that Octavian, you have to do this one. You have to take in this information from this actor and make it an appropriate thing. That's a very new idea, because as you know, what we wanted from singers in the 60s was we wanted the thing we heard about from Munich to come to New York, and we didn't care that they brought their own costumes and that they were wearing plaid in a production that had no plaid. We didn't care because we wanted that thing that we had always heard about, and we wanted the myth of that sound. So we weren't interested in them doing a different Octavian for this Marshallin.
Right.
That's different now. And audiences expect that if they see you do, because I had this happen to me. I did a production of Don Giovanni in Baltimore, and a lot of people came who had seen me do the Don Giovanni in Glimmerglass in 1995, which was directed by Peter Stormare, the wonderful Swedish actor who is in Fargo. He was the Swedish guy in Fargo who dumped the guy in the wood chipper, and he's great. And it was I was like Daddy's little girl. I had a little white dress on, I couldn't make up my mind. It was very serio-comic, the function I performed in that piece. And they were so fascinated by that they wanted to see something different. But the director of that had seen it, and he kind of wanted the same thing. And with James Morris as Don Giovanni, it was really easy to do that. So these people came backstage, and they were like, oh, it was great, but we thought you were going to be different this time. They were super disappointed. So, yeah, I think audiences now expect that if they see your Me at the Met and then they go to Paris, it's a different Me. Because it's a different cast, different production, different ideas have gone into the storytelling.
You've mentioned the house a couple of times in your new program.
My house.
Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, I got this idea a couple of years ago. To be perfectly honest, there was a whole part of me that just didn't want to go I'm 70 and I don't sing anymore and I better go teach voice in Alabama. Nothing wrong with Alabama, but I just didn't want to be in that. And I have I have a lot of books. I have a lot of music. I have a lot of stuff, don't I? I don't know. I got it in my head that it might be interesting to share that and to slow down. It gave me an excuse to slow down. And not be quite as busy, to start developing my own work. And a odd confluence of coincidence came about, and the New York Foundation for the Arts asked me to be in their Artist as Entrepreneur boot camp. And in talking to Martina Arroyo, she had no housing. She was never able to offer housing for any of her students, so I thought, well, I'll find a place. And so through this boot camp and Martina Arroyo's need for housing for her summer students, this idea happened. And by the end of 7 weeks, I had a business plan. I was almost incorporated. I raised a couple $1,000s toward my goal, and I was off and running. So.
And the program is?
It's basically students live with me. They pay room and board slightly lower than what it would be at colleges and universities right now. And we've done a few dinners with, we had Bill Bolcom there. We've had a few things like that. We're going to perform together at the Galapagos Art Space in June. A couple of opportunities came my way that I passed along to them. So one of the students is going to be working with AOP this summer. Another student's going to be doing a program in Boston. So it's all kind of appropriate for where everybody is, but sort of more interesting maybe than what they thought they were going to do. I don't know. You have to ask them. We sang together. We did a benefit for my house. We all sang together.
So kind of anti-name of opera.
It is kind of, in a weird way, without the alcohol. My nose just grew out. I don't know. It's this idea. Honest to God, I really thought we'd be sitting around the table like talking about Verity, but mostly I did. I'm stupid. But mostly there's like a lot of just day-to-day kind of like, don't beat yourself up over the head. You've got a lot on your plate. You did really well with this, so why don't you take some time off? There's a lot of just like life things, which frankly I never had. I like steamrolled my way through a lot of stuff, for better or worse. And so in some ways it's commonsensical stuff. My books are everywhere, and I wish people would use them a little bit more than they do. But I mean, it's big on, it's me, so it's big on discussion, a lot of topics, trying to keep people moving. One of the girls is at Manhattan School of Music, so she's in a program. So I'm just trying to make sure she gets the most out of it and gets noticed. There was another girl that was there that ended up going home after 4 months, who was just out of college, and I think finally realized that, college is a lot, and sometimes you need a little bit of a break. But it was a good time to like see what it was like to get voice teachers and all of that. And then we have another girl living there who's been out of school for a while, but has really made big strides in terms of finding a new voice teacher, changing her way into it, and she reads a lot of books though, that girl. Everything I throw her way, she grabs a hold of. So it's, I don't know, it's interesting, it's exciting. And we've had like friends of theirs come and stay, and dinners, and it's, I imagine that by next year we'll have like a lot more dinners, because I did it very slowly, because I do all the cooking and cleaning. So I didn't want to get in over my head, and I have a dog and a cat. And so, but starting June 5th, there are 6 people, 7 counting me, and a dog and a cat living in that house that I'm working with every day. And we'll probably do the thing we did last summer, which Notebook Thursdays, where everybody brings their notebook to dinner and we talk about the historical significance of the operas that they're working on. So, but I did it slowly, but word's getting out now, so I have a feeling that I get a lot of people saying, I'd love to come over and talk to your students about, like, we're going to do something another week or two called The Business of Music with Richard Adams, who taught this great class, Manhattan School of Music, for years and years and years. I mean, like, since I was there. And it's all about like how to do your finances and how to put things together and handle the business of music as a separate thing. Pay your taxes, organize your paperwork, so.
That's great.
Yeah, no, it's been good.
We always like to leave a few minutes for questions from the audience, and I just wanted to see if anyone had a question for Lauren. Don't all raise your hands at the same time.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
Hi.
Hi.
You've talked about sort of opera being a little, I think, more safe in the environment that we're in terms of it being less messy and looking better. And I was wondering if you find that something that I've kind of found very frustrating in the opera world is the idea of coming into sort of cookie-cutter productions. And I was wondering, do you think that the internal work that you do and the character work that you do and the knowledge that you bring into the role sort of helps you come into a situation like that? Do you encounter similar situations?
So here's the thing about opera. Everything's cookie cutter. Because especially now, most things are designed for specific people. So if you are coming in 5 years from now, you're going into that thing that was designed for that person. So you need to do a lot of work and figure out, like, what was that person like? What was the reaction to that person? Like, what kind of career did that person have? So you're going to get an idea. You're going to get an idea, like, what are these designers like? What's the world of design that they've lived in? This director, what kinds of productions has he directed? And then, how does it lead up to this moment? At the Metropolitan Opera, let's say, you're going to go and do, let's pick a Traviata, okay? with Bondi again, right? Is it with Bondi? And it was designed for Anna Netrebko in Berlin, maybe? In Salzburg. And then it comes here. She decides she doesn't want to be in competition with her own DVD, so she pulls out of this production, and this woman, Maria Poplovskaya?
Yes.
Maria, right?
Mm-hmm.
She does this. So now you're going to go do this. So you're going to go, I'm going to look at the DVD of Anna Netrebko because it was built on her, and everything she's doing there is with the consent and the blessing of everybody on that production team. Then you're going to look at what the Metropolitan Opera did, because fortunately you've got HD now. So you're going to look at this girl, and you're going to see they're different. The way they got to this moment is different. The way they moved through this moment is different. The way they related with Germain when he comes in is different. The way they fall in love with Alfredo is completely different. And then, so you have all the work that you did, and then you've watched all of this. So then you're going to go into the rehearsal, and here's what you're going to do. Everything you did, you're going to keep completely quiet and to yourself. It's your little secret. How well prepared you are is your secret. And here's the thing. When I say that, most people say to me, well, why is it my secret? Because nobody really gives a crap what we think, all right? They don't. But people understand when you're prepared and they don't pick on you. And when they sense you're not prepared in an opera rehearsal, you make your life miserable. And since you are going to have to find the life of this character that these two interesting artists found in a very different way, two very different women, physically not at all resembling each other. So you're going to have to find your way, and you're going to do it with the knowledge of what she did, and then you're going to come into that. Now, what you're going to know is that whoever the director is, and it's not going to be Luc Bondy, it's going to be his assistant, whose assistant, whose assistant. They're not going to expect that you're actually going to pick up the glass on Libiamo, on Lee, but that your intention is to create this energy of Libiamo so that you're in that moment and you keep the context of the production completely intact. And that's like the little game you play with yourself. Is like, how can I do this? How can I how can I put my life and the work I've done into those circumstances? And they're not going to expect me to be like her because she wasn't like her, and I know that. I've seen that. And let's say it's 5 years from now. So you have Trebko, you have Poplovskaya, then you have, I don't know, Georgiou. So you've got da-da-da-da-da. Let's say they go crazy and put Angela Mead in there, which would be so super cool. I would like, my head would burst because I love that girl so much. But she doesn't look at anything like that. So, and Angela's like more like my side. You know what I mean? Like, that's a totally different thing. then you're gonna go, phew. I don't have to look like this, and what's this energy she brings to this, and the authenticity she brings to it. And it's all cookie cutter to a certain extent. I mean, it always was, it always will be. Anything Teresa Stratas originated was done by other people, and they, to a varying degree, right or left, given a measure or a couple of eighth notes here and there, maybe, a quarter note, half note, the glass came up before Mo of Libiamo. You know what I mean? So that the intention remains intact. That's what the director and that's what the conductor is interested in. Is that through your own human experience and all the work that you've done, but with the knowledge of what's come before you, you do it yourself. And I'll just be honest with you, I did a lot of that, and it's a really fun intellectual exercise for you. It's not at all boring. Most people think it's boring, but it isn't. Because and then in many ways, people end up rediscovering a show because you paid that kind of attention to detail. And then, like, critics go, I never saw it like this before. Because they didn't.
Other questions? Yes?
Did you ever have any downtime, and what did you do during that downtime? Or was it constant? You always had work?
I never had any downtime. And mostly I didn't have downtime because, for whatever reason, I never did the same opera twice in 1 year. I was always learning 7 new, that's why I know 106 operas. It's because every year I was learning 7 to 8, 9 operas a year, new, brand new. But I did a lot of stuff like, those great toe tappers that I happen to personally love, Mary Mount, Peter Ibbotson, that aren't done very often. Morning Becomes Electra. So I had a lot of one-offs, they say, where I did it and then never did it again. So nobody was, and it didn't spark the imagination of the ticket buying public to let, Chattanooga want to do it. So,
But you were also making work for yourself too, so that whether you were learning a role or performing something, you were also doing some creative performing.
right, I was
of your own.
constantly like talking to composers and, looking at small orchestras. I mean, I did a lot of stuff with Deborah Drotell way before she was like the writer of Central Park. Do you know what I mean? She wrote some very interesting, I was very interested in this Sylvia Plath and this book that came out, The Letters Between She and Her Mother. Really creepy but beautiful and interesting. And I just, threw it at her, and she wrote a beautiful piece for Angelina Rayo and I to do. And then like this orchestra that doesn't exist in New York anymore decided they would do it, and it paid like $300. There used to be a joke where I would say, I'm going to make $100,000, $300 at a time if it kills me, and. But I didn't have a lot of I just didn't have a lot of downtime. I did get exhausted though I don't remember. I was completely exhausted and I let my passport lapse. I think it was 2004. And 2 days after I let my passport lapse, I got an offer to do Norma in the Amazon. So I got my passport reinstated and I went, and then it became this incredible year where in 1 year I was in the Amazon, I was in Cape Town, South Africa, I was in Reykjavik, Iceland, I was in Greenland. It was in 1 year I went to these amazing, amazing places. And so I think there's less downtime. See, a career for an American opera singer is very different. Europeans have a very different ethic about this whole thing. That's another reason why I started the house, was because I wanted people to see you could have a life and do the dishes and have people over, because as Americans, we're told like, oh, you can't have a dog. Oh, don't get a dog. Oh, I guess you must not be going to travel anymore. And oh, don't get married. Like the pressure on women in opera, American women, not to get married. And then you go to Italy and they're all married and they all have family. And you finish rehearsal and you're like, and we're going to go out for dinner. And they're like, gotta go get the baby. And you're like, okay. So you start to understand that like everybody else thinks of it as just a regular part of life. And that was another reason for doing it, was just to sort of keep reinforcing that you could do everything, so.
Well, we've reached that time where we have a very informal time together with some wine and some light refreshments. You get to say hello to Lauren if you haven't met her. If you know her well, you can ask her some good questions from this conversation. But at the moment, you can all join me in a round of applause for Lauren.
Before we go, who came here prepared to sing today?
I just came from a voice listening to music.
That's the difference between me and you. And remember, you were in my class. Remember when I teach my class, I always say like, when I pay the bill at a diner, I could sing the change. Like and that, I think, is the biggest difference between between what we experienced in the 70s, is that you were just taught that every moment was the next greatest opportunity, and we were just ready. We were ready. And that's why you are always creating a performance.
And you mean psychically ready or vocally ready?
I mean both. You were psychically ready because you were going to handle... You were where you were vocally, and you were 23, so you weren't going to make an apology for it because nobody expected you to sound 35. And that's the thing. It's like, I really want people, that's the biggest thing I would think that everybody needs to be ready. Because people will accept your level of readiness. They aren't expecting Maria Callas. They really aren't. They really aren't. They want to just be surprised. And sometimes they're just surprised because you're ready and everybody else isn't. And that's the thing, because it's so weird. It's like I get so emotional, but, I feel like I am who I am a lot because of you. Like when I met you, we became instantaneous friends, and everything I did, he was like, do more. do more. So I had to be ready because I was expected to do more. Like there was this thing of do more, do more. And I think the thing that you liked about me and that crazy Alan and Robert Larson from Des Moines and Francesca Zambello is that I was ready. I didn't think I was vocally finished, but I was just ready to take on a challenge. And I feel like if you could just be ready, that everyone will bring you up to where you need to be. But you've got to be ready. You just got to be ready. Sorry, I don't know why I thought of that, but that's my saying for the day.
Whether you sing or not, it's a good lesson. Lauren, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen,
Thank
please
you.
join us for a slide.